I wanted to introduce myself. My name's Haley. I work with the Columbia Mountains Institute. And how many here, I imagine there's a bunch of people here who don't know who CMI is. Hands up, you've never heard of us. Yep, and that's totally not, that's common for Revelstoke. A lot of people in town don't know who we are, even though our office has been in town here for, I don't even know how long, to be honest, over 15 years. And we put on professional development opportunities for ecologists, primarily. So we put on courses, conferences that delve into different land management issues. But we are also doing this, which is our CREDtalks. And this is a series, a speaker series, where we delve into issues around environmental management, ecosystem science, research techniques, land management conundrums, restoration initiatives, that sort of thing. And we have, I think we're in our 4th season, and I want to thank the Columbia Basin Trust for funding this 4th season. Thanks to them. And there are 5 talks booked for this season so far. So our next talk, I'll just highlight for you briefly, is with Lisa Larson. Hands up. She is with Parks Canada, and she'll be delivering a talk called Songbirds of Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks. So that's on Thursday, November 28th, in this room at noon, with the sound of preschoolers in the background. We'll just dive right into it. I'd like to welcome Amber Peters today. She's come here with the Valhalla Wilderness Society, and there are a couple other people here with the Valhalla Wilderness Society as well. So I imagine you might introduce them later. I'm just going to read Amber's bio, and then we'll get started. And before I do, I just want to let you know that this talk is being recorded. So if you want to listen to it again, or you know somebody who missed it and they want to catch it, in theory, if all goes well, I'm going to be posting it to our website after a little bit of editing in a couple weeks. So, Amber Peters, she holds a bachelor degree in science from the University of British Columbia. She practices through the College of Applied Biology as a staff biologist with the Valhalla Wilderness Society, and she was part of the first expeditions carried out in performing the scientific inventories of the Rainbow Jordan Wilderness, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, and that's why you're here. Thanks.
So thank you so much to Haley and to CMI for hosting us. This is really exciting for us. So I am here as well with 2 of my colleagues, Craig Pettit and Anne Sherrod, who are longtime environmental warriors, and I'm very blessed to be their team member with the Valhalla Wilderness Society. So the Valhalla Wilderness Society has been working for over 40 years to protect wildlife habitat in British Columbia. And starting with the campaign to protect the Valhalla Provincial Park, which began in the mid-70s, the organization has led park campaigns that now protect over 500,000 hectares of BC wilderness. Over the past 20 years, one of the major projects of the organization has been focused on the interior wet belt of British Columbia, also known as the Inland Temperate Rainforest region. And the goal of the Valhalla Society has been to identify and map out the most ancient intact remnants of this ecosystem. So you can see that the interior wet belt covers most of southeastern BC, but it is only the wet and very wet interior cedar hemlock forest types that are considered true rainforest. And these are the forests that are able to maintain enough moisture year-round to host coastal rainforest species. So we do see a plethora of coastal rainforest lichen species. One rainforest indicator in particular that you see here is of the genus Sporophorus. It's a coastal coral lichen species. So only the wettest forests and the most intact and pristine forests can host these such abundant colonies of coastal species. And then we also see interesting plant growth such as ferns growing high in the crevices of cedar trees, which is very indicative of a wet ecosystem. And then you also get this really lush moss growth that's very characteristic of true rainforest. And some of these colonies can actually be quite ancient. So until 2017, there had only been 3 major intact biodiversity hotspots that have been discovered in British Columbia of this ancient inland temperate rainforest ecosystem. And these were in the Robson Valley, the Untitled Valley Ancient Forest, and the rainforest around Quesnel Lake. Then in 2017, Dr. Toby Sperbilli, a lichenologist with the University of Alberta, identified the Valhalla Wilderness Society, or alerted the Valhalla Wilderness Society of an area just north of Revelstoke that he thought might still contain vast tracts of this truly ancient inland rainforest ecosystem in 2 very low elevation contiguous valleys. So this is our study area here. Frisbee Creek, which is just adjacent to the very popular Frisbee Ridge recreation area, and then a valley just north of it, which is actually unnamed, but we have named it Rainbow Valley because of a beautiful rainbow that was appearing over it on the day of exploration. And so logging is encroaching around this intact wilderness on both sides. So it's very special to find this intact wilderness of 2 contiguous valleys that are also completely unroaded, and we're running out of this type of intact wilderness in British Columbia. So I joined the Valhalla Wilderness Society in 2017, and I was lucky enough to get to take part in the very first exploratory reconnaissance and species surveys and wildlife habitat assessment that followed in these 2 valleys. So we are a nonprofit organization, so I would just like to say thank you so much to our donors and our supporters for making all of this possible. When we entered into the largest of the 2 valleys for our initial reconnaissance in 2017, we were thrilled to, in fact, find this very ancient inland temperate rainforest ecosystem. And we didn't have time at this point for full species surveys, or any species documentation, really, but we knew that we had come across a very biodiverse and rich ecosystem, an incredibly wet ecosystem that was could be considered true rainforest. We came across vast tracts of this ancient cedar hemlock forest with trees well over 3 meters in diameter. And some of these trees can be in the age range of 1,500, perhaps even older, based on some of our aging that's been done in the Untitled Ancient Forest, which has been studied more extensively by the Valhalla Society. So we returned home and we alerted the team of what we had found, and we were very excited. And we started planning the very first ecological inventories of these 2 valleys to take place in 2018. And there were no previous records of any scientific study having taken place here, so it was very exciting that we found what seemed to be an almost unknown wilderness area. And what we found when we entered back into the largest of the 2 valleys was not only vast tracts of this ancient inland rainforest ecosystem, but also a mosaic of all sorts of other ecosystem types. So you can see a very prominent wetland ecosystem here near the mouth of the Frisbee Valley. And we not only found very ancient forests, but also young forest, mixed stands, deciduous forest, all sorts of avalanche slides, giant bulge rock slides where conditions were such that very unique lichen colonies could be or could grow. And multiple types of wetlands, including marshes, fens, and a previously undocumented wetland ecosystem type, which was pretty exciting. And there are also all sorts of waterfalls in this valley with very lush spray zones that are highly biodiverse, sandy beaches on the river shore, and this very unique forest type called an elfin forest, where these very old hemlock trees are growing in conditions such that they're stunted in their height and somewhat in their diameter, and they have this very characteristic gnarly bark structure. So there was quite an extensive elfin forest in the in the smaller of the two valleys, and this was also the site of a provincially blue-listed species at risk, Loberia retigera, the smoker's lung lichen. And it was found growing in abundance, so it's in other areas it's been found just in small specimens, so that was pretty exciting. So the first actual ecological inventory that took place was a plant and lichen survey, and this was completed with Curtis Bjork and Toby Sperbilli, who are two taxonomic experts in the inland temperate rainforest region. So it was just a pleasure to work with them. And over a 3-day period in the two valleys, we surveyed a variety of different habitat types, but focused on the areas that we expected to contain the greatest biodiversity and also that might yield rare species. So a major focus in this ecosystem type is are the lichens, and the reason that this organism is so important is that they're indicators of ecosystem health, and there are also an array of lichens that indicate a very rare, biodiverse, and some of the oldest and wettest forests that we have. So again, some of them are very characteristic of a true rainforest ecosystem, and they can also indicate other or high biodiversity in other species types. So this is just a preliminary list of the number of different plant and lichen species that were found, and since then there have been more additions to this list, and this is not an exhaustive inventory as well. So we imagine that upon further study, there are going to be more discoveries as well. There have also been a number of provincially red and blue listed species found in the two valleys, but many of the species that have been discovered that are rare and uncommon are not actually recognized yet in British Columbia. So they're not listed, but it's largely been the work of Toby and Curtis, who have described and identified and assessed some of these very rare species, and species that are very rare to be found in the inland rainforest ecosystem. So Dr. Toby Sperbilli has a list of about 25 different indicator species that do indicate truly ancient, wet, biodiverse, true rainforest ecosystems. And so far in this, what we're calling the Rainbow Jordan Wilderness, we have found 20 of those 25 species. And again, some of them have been found in unusually large colonies as well. This was the smoker's lung lichen that I mentioned before. And only one non-native plant has been found, so that indicates a very healthy ecosystem as well. And this was an exciting find, the Methuselah's beard lichen, Usnea longissima. It had only been found in a few small fragments inland before, but in one local area in the larger of the two valleys, it was found growing in abundance in a few colonies. And again, this is an indicator of a very wet and biodiverse ecosystem. And then there is a stunning array of plant life that we've come across, and there has been quite an extensive inventory documented so far, but definitely not an exhaustive one. In addition to rare and at-risk species that we've found in these valleys so far, we've also come across more common rainforest species that are growing in unusual abundance and size. So this is Oploplanax, commonly referred to as Devil's Club, and I've never seen it at this stature before. And the same goes for the skunk cabbage. So this is truly a BC jungle and an incredibly rich ecosystem. Then we undertook the first wildlife habitat assessment in the larger of the two valleys with our bear biologist and wildlife biologist Wayne McCrory. And again, this was only an initial survey. It took place just over 1 day in an area just under 1.5 kilometers in the main valley along a prominent wildlife trail. But over the past 2 years, we have been documenting any wildlife sign that we have come across. And we have noticed abundant ungulate activity, lots of bear activity, as well as signs of native amphibians near the wetlands. And so we have found western toad and Pacific chorus frog near one of the wetlands, which indicates that this could be an important breeding area for them, especially considering that it is adjacent to forested habitat. But surveys of the wetlands have not yet been completed, so there's lots more to see. So we assessed bear habitat suitability along this transect in various habitat types, young and old forest and avalanche tracts, and also documented different bear and ungulate food items. And we searched for black bear dens in these hollow ancient cedar trees. So we did come across a number of bear and ungulate foods and some sign of actual feeding, as well as an interesting moose kill site where the carcass had been dragged, and we figured that it was likely a grizzly bear feeding site. And we came across some smaller excavated dens as well, so this is likely a mustelid of some sort, and there's just so much more to study here. And here are Wayne and Craig with a giant cedar black bear den. We've come across a few of these with signs of excavation that they actually are being used. And then we've been monitoring trail cameras in the largest of the two valleys as well. And we have had some technical difficulties, but we've placed these along high-use wildlife trails, and we have at least been able to get some interesting footage and confirm some of our findings so far. So here's a mother and two black bear cubs, which is kind of hard to see. It's been at least entertaining, to say the least, to see these videos. And since then, we've found a few bear rub trees that we're hoping to get some interesting footage from as well. Then further back in the largest valley, there are also these incredibly deeply rutted wildlife trails. And we can only imagine the stories that could be told here, but we speculate that perhaps they could have been created by large herds of mountain caribou at one point in time. So when we undertook the first wildlife habitat assessment, we were completely distracted by the diversity of macrofungi that were popping up all around us. There was just such a colorful array of species. We knew that something very special was happening here. And as soon as we got home, we had to call our mycologist friend, Tyson Ellers, to undertake the first mycological survey of this valley. And again, this was only an initial survey. In just one day, in under 5 hours, Tyson documented 112 different taxa of macrofungi. But he was completely overwhelmed. There was way greater diversity than he could have possibly even scratched the surface of. So there's so much more work to be done here to uncover the secrets of the biodiversity here. But in those 5 hours, Tyson did document 10 young forest species, 6 species that were completely unique to the wetland riparian area that was surveyed, 17 mixed stand species, and 79 old growth species. So the focus was on the old growth. It's definitely the most biodiverse area, and it's well known that the mycological diversity in these old growth forests far exceeds that of the other surrounding ecosystems. And we're only beginning to understand what the importance of this diversity really means. So there is a lot of research coming out to suggest that most of the carbon stored in these forests may actually be locked up in the mycelial networks underground. So these smaller species are often overlooked, but we're only beginning to understand what their true importance could be. And then we've come across this very rare species as well, so this was exciting, Hypocrea leucopus, which is a relative of the cordyceps fungus, which is a more well-known one. And there had been no previous records in the Kootenay-Columbia region. So again, we're only beginning to scratch the surface of what is present here. We haven't undertaken any sort of entomological survey, but just from what we've seen so far, we can imagine that that would also yield promising results. And in a forest of similar diversity in the inland temperate rainforest region, the Nkamaplu ancient forest that has been more deeply studied by the Valhalla Society, many new species to science have been discovered. So we imagine that in this intact wilderness, the same could very well be true upon further study. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why the ancient inland temperate rainforest ecosystem? This ecosystem type is not only rare in British Columbia, but it is completely globally rare and globally significant for a number of reasons. As we've seen, they're highly biodiverse, so we see all throughout the forest just carpets of species on top of carpets of other species. And again, we're only beginning to understand what the implications of this this very intact, extreme biodiversity really means. They're also very understudied. So in British Columbia in general, only about 3,800 species have been assessed of an estimated 50,000 species, not including single cellular organisms. And we're losing this taxonomic expertise. There's very little funding for this taxonomic work. But in a time of biodiversity loss, this could be some of the most important work that we could be doing. And in the inland rainforest region, there are at least 40 known species at risk. But again, we don't know what we could be missing and what we could be losing without ever having even discovered it, and what kind of value that these species could hold to humankind that we're losing rapidly. So it's very important to preserve these intact and resilient ecosystems. And this Rainbow Jordan wilderness that we're showing you here today, it's one of such few similar ecosystem types that it could provide significant refuge to rare and at-risk species and species that are dependent on this ecosystem type in particular. These are some of our highest biomass forests, and so they are also some of our greatest carbon sequestering forests in the world. Better than tropical forests, but they're not given nearly the credit that they deserve in terms of their importance. They're also some of our most resilient forests, so we can see that they are proven resilient by their age. They have obviously withstood hundreds, if not many thousands of years of climatic flux, likely pests and disease, and they are our best bet in the coming decades with what we're projecting to see with climate change, that they're going to hopefully stand tall amidst all of the other landscape changes that are happening. And continue to provide refuge for this incredible biodiversity that provides us with the ecosystem services that we need to survive. The wettest of these forests are also the least likely to burn, so we're rapidly losing other forest types that are more susceptible to fire, that are younger. Plantation forests are far more susceptible to burning, but these wettest forests are the most likely to be able to harbor their biodiversity and stand tall into the future. And again, they provide invaluable ecosystem services, massive volumes of fresh, clean water, clean air, and they regulate water flow as well, just to name a few. Botanical and medicinal products, again, we don't know what the true value to humankind really is in these ecosystems, but traditionally we can see that there is great importance here. And of course, there is incredible spiritual value that comes from keeping these ancient forests intact. So there's a complete sense of peace and wellness brought to anyone who visits these forests. And for any of our supporters and friends that we've taken into this wilderness, I think that they would all agree with us that the benefits of these ecosystems measure far beyond their ecological significance. Unfortunately, only 17% of the inland rainforest region is protected. And this is compared to 33% of our coastal temperate rainforest in BC. And much of the protected area within the inland rainforest region is actually in higher elevation and lower biodiversity forest. So now in these four major intact, truly ancient inland rainforest biodiversity hotspots, they're completely unprotected except for part of the Robson Valley. So this ecosystem type is hugely underrepresented in our park system. So since completing these initial ecological inventories and all of the other excursions that we've taken into these two valleys over the past 2 years, we have mapped out these valleys as a new provincial park proposal to the BC government. We've also included a major portion of the Jordan River. And what we're focusing on here is protecting the last of the oldest, most resilient and biodiverse forests. So you can see vast tracts of interior cedar hemlock forest all throughout the proposal, as well as very old Engelmann spruce subalpine fir forest. So here's a summary of the old forest captured within the park proposal. And again, this is the focus of preservation here. And so there's most of the forest is in age class 9, which also includes the very ancient forest. And I just want to close by saying that we are rapidly running out of opportunities to pass any of this heritage on to the next generation. We are losing these ecosystems so quickly, and we don't know what kind of dire consequence that this could have for future generations, but we know that this is our greatest safety net with the impending landscape changes and climate change that we are expecting to see. And I hope that you will all stand with me in being a voice for the very last of these ancient ecosystems in British Columbia, and please reach out if you'd like to know how else you can help. So thank you so much to everyone for listening, and I'm open to any questions that you may have.